Hello, I'm John, and this is the first video of my horror short story collection rereading project, in which I am rereading horror short story collections that I read when I was in my teens and probably my I don't know if it went into my early 20s, but probably so. And this is the first installment. And the first book that I have reread is Stephen King's Night Shift. And I've always enjoyed this book since I first read it. I first read it when I was in 7th or 8th grade. I have two copies that are exactly alike, and both of them are from 1979. This one is in better shape, so I read this one because my original is falling apart. So there are 3 Stephen King books on this list: Night Shift, Skeleton Crew, and Nightmares and Dreamscapes. I want to start with the earliest books, or the earliest stories rather, of these authors and work my way forward. So the other authors are Ramsey Campbell, Joe Lansdale, Clive Barker, H.P. Lovecraft, and Thomas Ligotti, right. And I may have left somebody out of that list. Anyway, so I counted this up, I have read 47 books by Stephen King. Some were fiction, some were nonfiction. For instance, On Writing, he had a book about horror in general. I can't remember the name of that right off the top of my head. So this is from I believe this is from either 1978 or 1977. And I was happy to return to this. I was kind of interested to realize that some of the stories that I thought were in this book are not in this book, but are actually in Skeleton Crew. So that was interesting right off the bat, to realize that my memory is not as good as it used to be. And I was really interested in seeing if the stories that I liked when I was younger are still the stories that I like now that I'm almost 33. It is coming on like a freight train. And in some cases, the stories that were my favorites when I was younger are still my favorites. And at least one of them is, on a reread as a more mature reader, has kind of fallen off of that list for reasons that I will talk about in a moment. I'm not going to talk about every story in this book, and there will likely be some spoilers. I'm not exactly sure how in-depth those spoilers will be. This is not going to be a really in-depth analysis or review or anything like that. This is just me talking about some of the things that I noticed in these stories. Let's see, what's it been? Over the past 17, 18 years, however long it's been since I first read this book. I guess it's 20 years. I don't know. My timetables are all off. The older I get, the less I can remember when certain things happened. But I do remember I first read this when I was in 7th or 8th grade. So, my favorite stories of the past were Gray Matter, Children of the Corn, The Ledge, Trucks, and Strawberry Spring, which remain on that list. So we will go on here. I also finally understood a couple of stories. The Last Rung on the Ladder, which had always kind of eluded me when I was younger, I finally understood it. And The Lawnmower Man. I'm going to go a little more in depth in a second. But The Lawnmower Man, I finally understood that. I didn't like it any better now that I've understood it. So my favorite stories on this reread were Children of the Corn, The Last Rung on the Ladder, The Woman in the Room, Sometimes They Come Back, and Strawberry Spring. So Children of the Corn and Strawberry Spring are still high in my esteem. So Children of the Corn, for instance, is about a married couple who are on the rocks. Their marriage is on the rocks. They're fighting all the time. And the husband is driving the car. His wife has they've been arguing back and forth. They don't like each other anymore. He is a Vietnam veteran, and they took this road trip across country to sort of work out their marriage. And he has taken a turn off the main highway and is driving through these rural roads in, I'm not exactly sure, I can't remember. I think it was in Kansas. It's been a little while since I read this. It's been about 3 weeks. And so the finer points of detail have fled. Once again, my memory is not as good as it used to be. And of course, I guess everybody knows how Children of the Corn works out. A boy comes out of the corn, the man hits him with the car, they get out and they realize that this boy has been murdered. And so he puts the boy in the trunk and they drive into town to find some police, someone to help with this murdered boy. And they discover that the town, like I said, there are going to be spoilers. All the adults in this town have been killed by the children who are worshiping a corn god. And I really enjoyed it. I really, really enjoyed this reread. Maybe even more so now as an adult than I did when I was younger. There's a real feeling between this couple of marital strife and anger and hatred. And I think that their bickering and their arguing was done really, really well. The description of this town was really interesting. Some of it is kind of just an interesting look at an America that really is gone, is past and gone. The gas prices, the prices for the food, the diner and all that. Now, is the story believable? Not really, but these are horror stories. You know, this is taking from this is taking reality and injecting something fabulous and horrible into that reality. It doesn't always have to be completely believable or anything like that, but I just really enjoyed that. I think it was done very well. So the next would be The Last Rung on the Ladder, which I said that I didn't really understand when I was younger, and now that I am an adult, I understand it pretty well. So it is a story told by a man about his sister. About we see it from what is going on in the present and also what happened in the past. So they grew up on a farm, and in a barn, it was a very, very tall barn with a ladder that went up about 70 feet. And when they were kids, they would climb this rickety old ladder and go out on a beam and jump into the hay. And if they had to go out quite a distance, and so if they had fallen off this beam at the wrong point, they would have died. And they are not supposed to do this, and they do it against their parents' wishes. And while his sister is climbing this ladder, the ladder breaks, and he works furiously to get enough hay to put under her so that she will be all right when she falls, because she's going to fall about 50 feet, 60 feet. And he goes through all this, and he tells her she has her eyes closed and she's hanging onto this broken ladder, and he tells her to let go, and she just does, and she falls into this hay and survives. And then we see that he goes off to law school, she goes off into her own life, she has failed marriages, she writes to him, he doesn't respond to her very often, he's too focused on his own life. And he, like I said, there are going to be spoilers here, she takes her own life. Eventually she does a swan dive off of a like a high-rise apartment building. And I don't know, that hit me really hard, because that is kind of how life works. You grow up around people and you think they're always going to be in your life, or you're always going to be in their life, and you split apart from each other, and you become so concerned with what's going on in your own life that you're not always there for people like you should be, or like they need you to be. And sometimes there are serious consequences for that, serious consequences that can never be taken back. And I really liked that. I thought that was done really well. So the next would be The Woman in the Room. I'm pretty sure that this is a story that came out of King's own experience with his mother. So it concerns a man who is dealing, he is watching his mother die from cancer. And the woman in the room is his mother in this hospital room. She is shriveling away. She is wasting away because of this cancer that has spread throughout her body. And it is about this man confronting this fact and dealing with this horrible, hideous situation that any of us could be plunged into from either side of that coin. We could either be the woman in the room, or we could be, the young man watching, dealing with the woman in the room. I don't mean dealing with, but dealing with the pain and the sadness and the memories and all of that terrible stuff. Um, and it also is about a choice that he is fighting with himself about easing her pain and remembering who she was when she was younger and thinking of her as she is now and feeling this terrible hopelessness, this just this intense sorrow. And that was one of the best stories in this book, actually. And um, it is sad, it's heartbreaking, it's awful, but it's the most realistic story in the book, along with the last rung in the ladder, the last rung on the ladder, rather. Next would be Sometimes They Come Back. I think that this is the longest story in the book. It is about a high school teacher, and when he was a young man, when he was actually very young, I think he may have been in elementary school, he and his brother were walking home one day and they were jumped by some neighborhood thugs. His brother was murdered by them, and then the thugs were never thrown in prison. They died in a car wreck. And so he knows that they are dead. And one day he goes into his classroom, there's a new student, and it is one of these boys who killed his brother, which is impossible. It's completely impossible. And a little while later, another one shows up, and it becomes apparent to him that they know who he is, and they are back for him, and they set out to make his life a living hell, and he finds a way to retaliate against them, and he pays a serious price for that. Unlike a few of the stories in this book, this has more mature writing from King. I felt it's not as clunky as, say, Gray Matter, which I'll be getting to soon. I thought that to the extent that it was believable, I thought it was well done in that capacity. And I just enjoyed it. I just plain enjoyed it. And so my next favorite was Strawberry Spring. Strawberry Spring has been one of my favorite stories for a long time. And so it's kind of about a false spring in Maine where a young guy who is, Stephen King was quite young at this time. I think he was in his, when this was published, he was in his 30s, his early 30s, I think, or maybe even his late 20s. But it's about a young guy who's going to a teacher's college in Maine. Or rather, it is about an older man who is looking back on his time at this teacher's college in Maine. And there was a Strawberry Spring, which I can't remember the exact definition of a strawberry spring at the moment, but it's kind of like a false spring. And there's a lot of fog, and it's kind of warm, that sort of thing, but followed by an intense cold. And a student of this college is found murdered. And it's him recounting how people reacted to this, how everybody seemed to know the murdered girl, and the rumors that spread, and how her boyfriend was arrested, but then someone else gets murdered, and so they have to let him go, and how all these students on this campus become very paranoid of each other, and this eerie quality of this fog, this Strawberry Spring, and of this unknown murderer stalking the nights. And we come to realize and the narrator comes to realize that maybe he has a great deal more to do with this than he thinks that he does. And I don't know why. I've just always really enjoyed that story. I like the atmosphere of it. It is an eerie story. It is a story concerning fugue states and perhaps maybe what our mind, what our body and our mind can get up to without our even being aware of it. Um, I don't know. I like that story a lot. And so some honorable mentions would be The Mangler, which is about a laundry mangler and an industrial laundry that becomes possessed by a demon. All these things kind of come together to possess this machine because there's like some belladonna spilled in the machine by some makeup or something. I can't remember exactly. And somebody cuts their hand on it and there's blood. And it's she was a virgin, so it's the blood of a virgin. And this mangler, this giant machine that folds like sheets and has all these rollers and everything. It's a very, very, very dangerous machine. And these workers have to feed these sheets into this machine, and it starts to eat them. And as it eats these workers, it becomes more and more powerful. And this police detective realizes it, and he and a friend set out to exorcise the demon out of this mangler. It's completely absurd. The reason it is an honorable mention is because Stephen King at this time was still young enough to remember really well what it was like to work in an industrial laundry, which he had worked in one himself. So he was very aware of what it's like to be in this place, the steam and the sweat, the hardship of doing this work. I'm pretty sure he worked in an industrial laundry. It's been quite a while since I've read his memoir autobiography. That was the rest is absurd. The mangler coming to life, and it was a little bit ridiculous. Another honorable mention is The Ledge, which is about a man who is having an affair with a woman who is married to a mobster, and the mobster makes him go out on his 15th floor balcony and climb over onto this little 5-inch ledge and go all the way around the building. And, if he gets back, he can go free. And I liked that. I thought it was well done. Now that I'm older, it kind of reminds me of that scene from the Naked Gun movie where Leslie Nielsen has to go out and go around the building. But I think it was in, I want to say it was in the movie Cat's Eye, right? I think it was made into a part of that, or I don't know. I get those movies mixed up. It might have been in that other one that I cannot recall at the moment. I always want to say it was Ted Danson, but Ted Danson was in the one where the guy gets buried up to his neck. After that is Graveyard Shift. I liked Graveyard Shift. It's about some workers who work at this ancient mill, and like a textile mill, and they're all about to be laid off because they're the new guys, and it's about to be summer vacation, so the new guys all get laid off. And the supervisor comes in and asks them if they want to do some extra work over this period. They'll get paid double, and it's all done at night. And they're going to clean up the basement and get rid of all this junk, all this old furniture and all this junk that has just been piled up in this basement for 100 some odd years. And they agree. And when they go down there, it is full of rats, huge rats. And as they dig deeper and deeper, all this mold and fungus and rot, there are bigger and bigger and bigger rats. And once again, I think King did industrial work really well, hard labor, writing about that sort of thing really well. It does have kind of an absolutely absurd ending. Here comes a spoiler, but this guy, the main character, has an animosity toward the supervisor. And I think that we are supposed to believe that the idea is that the supervisor is forcing these guys to clean out this space so that he can feed them to the rats down in this cellar. But that's never really spelled out, and if the main character actually comes to believe that, I didn't see where he actually said that, but he forces this supervisor down into this cellar, and they are both attacked by rats. Um, so that kind of detracted from the story because it didn't really make sense why he decided to go down into that cellar with the guy. So I didn't quite get that. The next is The Man Who Loved Flowers. So this is about a man who, on a pleasant spring day, is walking through New York City, and he has this beatific look on his face, and everybody thinks that he has fallen in love. And it's about all the people who encounter him, and they think about their own love, and he buys some flowers, and he goes to meet his girlfriend, only it's not his girlfriend, he's a crazy killer. And I liked that. I liked that story, rather. It wasn't anything really to write home about. An interesting look at how we can look at somebody and think that we know what they're thinking and what they are feeling, but really they may be completely different on the inside than we think they are. And I think that was really interesting. And the last of the honorable mentions for me is I Am the Doorway. And that is a story about the cover here, about a man who is sent to Mars as maybe I don't think it was Mars, it might have been Venus. I think it was Venus. He's sent to Venus as an astronaut, and something goes wrong. I think something goes wrong. The guy that he is with dies on re-entry. He survives, and he's been paralyzed, but he lives in a house on the beach, and he starts to have this terrible itching in his hand. And it gets worse and worse, and then one morning he wakes up and there are eyes in his hand. And the only real difference is that the eyes in this cover are blue, whereas the eyes in the book are gold. And I don't know why they changed that. I think they should have left the eyes golden. But maybe they did that and the blue just looked better. I don't know. I just liked it. Stephen King sometimes, I haven't read any novel that Stephen King did past like Under the Dome. I don't really know why. I just kind of lost interest. I read The Dark Tower back to back with like the Tommy Knockers and the supposedly last Castle Rock novel, which I don't know if it is still the last Castle Rock novel. Needful Things. And I like Needful Things. I did not like the Tommy Knockers. And I really didn't care for the last couple of volumes of the Dark Tower series, so stopped reading King for a long period of time. But the creature which is hitched a ride with him back to Earth in his body, we get to see through its eyes and how it sees Earth and Earthlings, and it is terrified and horrified and disgusted and cannot figure out what it is seeing. And we see this man deal with this being within him, and he realizes that not only is it in him, but he can see through its eyes also. And the creature starts to panic, and I think that's pretty good. I tend to like when King goes into science fiction. So the ones that I liked the least were One for the Road, which is a Salem's Lot story. It's about some guys in a bar in the middle of a snowstorm, and a guy comes in who's almost frozen, and he says, I took this road, and my car is stalled. I need help, please. My family's in the car, and the guys are just like, man, you screwed up big time. And he's like, what are you talking about? And they won't say it, but they do gradually come around to being like, look, man, there's vampires in Salem's Lot. Can't go to Salem's Lot. There's vampires over there. So your family's probably already been bitten. And the guy's like, y'all are insane. But they take him out to the car, and there are vampires. And it just didn't work for me. It just didn't work for me because here's the thing. Why have the vampires stayed in Salem's Lot? I don't understand that. There's nobody going to Salem's Lot, so they have no food, they have no prey. So why aren't they leaving Salem's Lot and coming into this town that is right down the road? I didn't grasp that. That took away from the story for me. I think it might have been just a better story if they had just stumbled onto some vampires out of nowhere rather than making it a Salem's Lot story, because they talk about how Salem's Lot had burned down and now nobody goes there, and sometimes a camper or somebody will just vanish. And then it just didn't work for me. The next is The Lawnmower Man, which is probably the strangest story in this entire book. A guy calls up a lawnmower service because something happened. Oh, I remember what happened. I won't tell you about it, but something really bad happens with his lawnmower, so he gets rid of it. And he calls a lawnmower service, and when the guy shows up, he takes off all his clothes and gets down on all fours and walks around behind the lawnmower, eating the grass clippings. And I finally understood that it has to do, I can't remember the name exactly, but I think it's only because I read the Odyssey that I understood what was going on, sort of. Uh, there is a part of the Odyssey where they go to an island, and the goddess on the island turns Odysseus's men into, I want to say, were they goats? That is sort of what's going on here. This ancient Greek uh, goat men thing brought into the contemporary world. There's some discussion about Circe and Dionysus, I believe. I didn't like the story any better, but I understood finally what Stephen King was going for there. It's still just an absurd story, and just not one of my favorites. And we're going to talk about last, Gray Matter, which used to be one of my favorites, but in this rereading really fell short. Um, I'm not saying it's the worst story of the bunch. It's just the one that I was kind of most disappointed by. I liked it, but it's it's told from an old man's point of view, and the old man's voice is really clunky. I thought it was really clunky the way that King did it. It's about a man who is sitting at home. He doesn't really do anything. He's on workers' comp, and he drinks a lot of beer and watches TV. And his son comes into this bar one day. So the guy sends his son to this bar to buy beer, and his son is in like middle school or maybe high school. It was the 70s. So he's always sending his son out to buy cigarettes and buy beer. And one day the boy comes into this bar and says, help me, something is terribly wrong," like he's terrified. And the owner of the bar takes him into the back, and he's saying, "Tell me what's going on. What's wrong? What can I do?" Because they know his father, but his father doesn't come into the bar anymore because he got hurt on the job and he doesn't really get around well now. So the boy tells him that his father drank some bad beer, and ever since he drank that bad beer, he has started to sit in the dark all day long. He started to smell really bad. He has started to become something that is not human. And gradually these guys in the bar start to realize, like, hey, people have been going missing from town. And so the owner of the bar gets his pistol out from under the bar, and they go off to this guy's house. And like I said, spoilers, lots of spoilers. He has become a fungus mold monster who is eating animals and people and is in the process of dividing. And after, we're seeing this from one of the bar patrons' perspectives. He's narrating the story. And when he goes back to the bar, instead of calling the CDC or the army or somebody to come in and deal with this dividing mold man, he just sits there and drinks and thinks about, well, if he's splitting into two now, and these two split, and then those split, and then those split. And it's just like, dude, do something about it, man. You're just going to sit there and drink more beer? Like, I don't know, that sort of ruined the story for me between the clunky narrative and the hopeless, I'm going to stare off at the ceiling, and it just didn't work for me. I think it would have made an interesting episode of Tales from the Dark Side. Um, yeah, so that is my rereading of Night Shift, and like I said, I enjoyed it. I tend to like earlier King better than later King. I enjoyed even the stories that I didn't really think were very good. And I was really glad to finally understand the Lawnmower Man, which is a story that I have been reading now since I was like 13 years old and not understanding what was going on. And I was glad to understand The Last Rung on the Ladder, even if it is a bleak story, it is a sad story, and it is a realistic story. Uh, but I enjoyed it. I was glad to revisit this. I was glad to see that some of my old favorites, like Children of the Corn, are still my favorites. I was really interested to see how my take on some of these stories has changed over the years. And so after this, I am reading, and I left it over there, so I'm going to go get it. The Del Rey edition of The Transition of H.P. Lovecraft, The Road to Madness. So this is some of some of Lovecraft's earliest stories from when he was very young, and I think there are 24 stories in this. This one is nothing but Lovecraft. Some of these Del Rey editions have Lovecraft and other authors, but I wanted to start at the earliest stories and go on from there. And I'm not doing these in any sort of order, really. I'm not sure where I will go after this. I'm thinking maybe Ramsey Campbell after Lovecraft. So that will be interesting. So I hope you enjoyed this first installment of my horror short story collection reread project, and I hope to see you for the next one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.